The email arrived at 2 a.m., jolting me awake from the first decent sleep I'd had in weeks. Just sign the papers to sell Harper Industries. $52 million. Not bad for a company your father cobbled together from nothing. Don't worry, Sarah, I'll send you photos from our new beachfront property in the Hamptons. I stared at the message from David, my hand steady as I took a screenshot and saved it to my growing collection of evidence. My husband always did love to announce his victories, especially the ones that weren't rightfully his to claim. My name is Sarah Harper, and I was about to teach my husband a lesson about the difference between marrying into a legacy and earning the right to destroy it. The irony was, if he bothered to attend any of the quarterly reviews in the past year instead of golfing with his fraternity brothers in Scottsdale, he might have noticed what I'd been quietly putting together. But David had always been like that, showing up only when it was time to take credit or collect profits. I switched to my messaging app, sending a quick text to our company's CFO. It's time. Move forward with phase 1. The response came back almost instantly. Already done. He won't know what hit him. I slipped out of bed, careful not to wake David, who'd returned late from his business dinner, smelling like expensive scotch and self-satisfaction. In the kitchen of our Boston home, I made a cup of coffee and watched the snow begin to fall outside. Dawn was still hours away, but sleep was impossible now. Harper Industries had been my parents' life's work. Dad was an engineer with a brilliant mind for industrial design. Mom was the operational genius who turned his innovations into a thriving business. They started in a rented garage in 1983, manufacturing specialized machine parts that nobody else could produce with the same precision. By the time they died, 6 days apart last year, as if even death couldn't separate them after 42 years of marriage, Harper Industries was supplying components to aerospace and defense contractors across the country. I was 26 when I brought David to Sunday dinner to meet my parents. He was charming, ambitious, with an MBA from Wharton, and the kind of confidence that made people trust him immediately. My father was impressed with his business acumen. My mother was more reserved. He's the kind who sees dollar signs where others see people, she told me later. I should have listened. But I was already in love, already imagining our future, how David would help modernize the family business, how we'd carry on my parents' legacy together. The kind of partnership they had, how wrong I'd been. My phone buzzed with a call from Jessica, my best friend since high school and now Harper Industries head of legal. Sarah, I just got the preliminary sales agreement from David's attorney. The numbers, they're not what he thinks they are. I took a sip of coffee, feeling the warmth spread through my chest. Send it over. The document appeared in my inbox moments later. There it was in black and white. David's grand plan to sell Harper Industries to Meridian Global, a corporate giant known for buying family businesses, stripping their assets, and outsourcing their manufacturing operations. What my husband hadn't realized was that over the past year, while he was busy spending company money on first-class flights and $500 dinners with potential clients, I'd been quietly restructuring everything. Each board meeting he skipped, each document he signed without reading, each proxy he casually granted me brought me one step closer to protecting what my parents had built. Did you see page 23? Jessica asked, still on the line. The share control assumption? Yes, I replied. He still thinks his position as CEO gives him controlling interest because my father named him successor. Jessica's laugh was sharp. Should we tell him about the voting trust conversion? Not yet. Let him figure it out when Meridian's lawyers start their due diligence. After hanging up, I opened my laptop and reviewed the quarterly projections. Harper Industries was on track for its most profitable year ever. The new military contract we'd secured 3 months ago, during a meeting David had skipped to attend a celebrity golf tournament, had opened doors we'd been trying to access for years. Unlike my husband, who couldn't distinguish between our CNC machines and our hydraulic presses, I'd worked on the factory floor every summer since I was 17. I knew every aspect of the business from the ground up. My father used to say, Sarah, success isn't inherited, it's earned through sweat and problem-solving and caring about something bigger than yourself. David never understood that. He thought marrying the boss's daughter entitled him to everything: the corner office, the respective employees who'd worked there for decades, the right to dismantle my parents' legacy for a quick payday. My phone buzzed again, this time with a message from David himself. Board meeting tomorrow at 11 a.m. Meridian executives will be there for the formal announcement. We're something impressive. Try not to say anything that might complicate things. I typed back. Wouldn't miss it. That evening, I met with key members of our management team at my parents' old house, the modest 4-bedroom where I grew up, which David had wanted to sell immediately after the funeral. The same living room where my parents had hosted company Christmas parties, where Dad had taught me to read engineering drawings, where Mom had shown me how to review contracts. Everything's in place, reported Mark, our operations director who'd been with the company for 27 years. The trust documents, the voting records, the financial audits, everything. And the employees? I asked, turning to Diane from HR. Diane smiled, her eyes crinkling at the corners. They're ready. Every single one signed the statement. I looked around the room at these people who'd worked alongside my parents for decades, who'd watched David's increasingly erratic leadership over the past year with quiet concern. Tomorrow's going to be difficult, I said. Are you all sure about this? Mark spoke first, his voice firm. Your parents didn't build this company to have it gutted by Meridian Global. We're with you, Sarah. All the way. The next morning, I arrived at Harper Industries headquarters an hour early, watching the winter sunrise paint our company sign in shades of pink and gold. Mom had designed that sign herself, balancing modern aesthetics with a nod to the industrial heritage of the region. At 10:45, David strode into the building flanked by 3 representatives from Meridian Global, 2 men and a woman in expensive suits, carrying leather portfolios and confident smiles. He'd gotten a fresh haircut, was wearing his power tie, playing the role of successful businessman for his buyers. Sarah, he called out, using the overly cheerful tone he adopted when others were watching. Ready for the big announcement? I met a smug smile with a calm one of my own. Absolutely. The boardroom filled quickly. Company executives, legal representatives, and the Meridian team all taking their assigned seats. David stood at the head of the table, practically bouncing with self-importance. Ladies and gentlemen, he began, today marks an exciting new chapter for Harper Industries. I'm pleased to announce that Meridian Global has agreed to purchase our company for $52 million. He paused, clearly expecting applause. None came. The paperwork is ready, he continued, slightly flustered. As CEO and controlling shareholder, I'm sorry, I interrupted, standing up. But there seems to be some confusion about that. The room went silent as I pulled out a leather folder and began distributing documents. What are you talking about? David demanded, his smile flickering. About your position, I replied. You're not the CEO of Harper Industries, David. You haven't been for 4 months. David's face flushed red. What the hell are you talking about? Of course I'm the CEO. Thomas named me his successor. Dad named you interim CEO, I corrected, subject to board approval and contingent on your active management of the company. I turned to the Meridian representatives. Would you like to know how many board meetings my husband has attended in the past year? The Meridian executives were already flipping through the documents I'd handed out, their expressions growing increasingly concerned. These attendance records, the woman said, show Mr. Harper has only been present for 3 out of 17 mandatory management meetings. David waved his hand dismissively. That's just paperwork. I own controlling interest in this company through my marriage to Sarah and the succession plan. I can sell it if I want to. This was the moment I'd been waiting for. I nodded to Jessica, who stood up, another document in hand. Actually, she said, according to the trust conversion executed by Sarah's parents before their deaths, your position was contingent on meeting certain management participation requirements. Requirements you failed to meet. She turned to the Meridian team. I'm afraid Mr. Harper no longer has the authority to negotiate this sale. In fact, he owns exactly 0% of Harper Industries. The color drained from David's face. You're lying. This is impossible. I pulled out one final document, the trust agreement my parents had signed 3 months before their accident, after watching David's increasingly irresponsible behavior. They knew David. They knew you'd try something like this. That's why they put safeguards in place. The Meridian executives were already gathering their materials, making polite but hasty excuses. This isn't over, David snarled, pointing at me. You think you can steal my company? No, David, I replied, feeling strangely calm. I think I can save my parents' company. There's a difference. As security escorted him from the boardroom, another change he hadn't noticed, the replacement of his college buddy with a professional security firm. I sat down in my father's old chair, feeling the weight of responsibility settle on my shoulders. Phase 1 was complete, but the real work was just beginning. My phone buzzed with a message from Jessica. Ready for Phase 2? I looked out through the glass walls of the boardroom to the factory floor, where employees were gathering, waiting to hear what would happen next. They had trusted me, supported my plan, believed in my vision for the company's future. Yes, I replied. It's time to show everyone what Harper Industries can really do. The media coverage started the next day. Family drama at Harper Industries. Wife blocks husband's $52 million sale. Read the headlines in the Boston Business Journal. My phone was flooded with calls from reporters, all wanting to know how the quiet engineer's daughter had outmaneuvered her high-profile husband. I ignored them all, focusing instead on the message that had just arrived from David's attorney. Our client contests the validity of the trust conversion and removal as CEO. Prepare for immediate legal action. I forwarded it to Jessica, who responded immediately. Let him try. Your parents made everything ironclad. Standing by the window of my office, my father's old office that David had redecorated with minimalist furniture that would have made Dad cringe, I watched snow falling on the parking lot. Employees arriving for their shifts walked with a new energy in their step, nodding to each other, smiling. Word had spread quickly about what happened in yesterday's board meeting. My assistant knocked lightly on the door. The management team is gathered in conference room B. And Sarah, there's a Detective Wilson here asking about the financial records you flagged last month. I smiled. Phase 2 is moving right on schedule. Tell the team I'll be there in 5 minutes. And please show Detective Wilson to my office. Detective Wilson was a no-nonsense woman in her 40s with shrewd eyes and a Boston accent that came out stronger when she talked about financial crimes. I'd contacted the white-collar division 6 weeks ago after discovering a pattern in our expense reports. Mrs. Harper, she said, shaking my hand firmly. I've reviewed the documents your legal team provided. We'll need to ask you some additional questions, but I want to be clear, you're also implicated in these records as a signatory. I understand, I replied, handing her a USB drive. That's why I've prepared a complete statement detailing which signatures are genuine and which ones I believe were forged. I've also included dates when I was out of the country and couldn't have signed those authorizations. She pocketed the drive with a slight nod. We'll be in touch. And Mrs. Harper, your husband has powerful friends. Are you sure you want to pursue this? I thought about the employee pension fund that had mysteriously lost 12% of its value under David's management, about the quality control inspector who'd been fired after raising concerns about substandard materials David had approved to cut costs. Absolutely sure. In conference room B, 20 department heads waited anxiously. These were the backbone of Harper Industries, men and women who dedicated their careers to building something meaningful. Some had been with my parents from the beginning. Others were newer, bright young engineers and managers I'd recruited personally over the past year. As you've all heard, I began, yesterday's attempted sale to Meridian Global has been stopped. But that's just the beginning. I clicked to the first slide of my presentation. This is Project Phoenix. For the next hour, I outlined the 3-year plan I'd been developing since my parents' death. Modernizing our production lines, expanding into renewable energy components, creating an employee development program that would be the envy of the industry. My parents built Harper Industries on 3 principles, I said, looking around the room. Innovation, quality, and treating people right. We're going to recommit to those principles starting today. Mark, our operations director, leaned forward. And David, what happens when his lawyers come after you? They already have, I replied. But I'm not worried about the legal battle. I'm focused on making this company too valuable for anyone to dismantle. As the meeting ended, Diane from HR lingered. The employees are asking about the rumors, about David and the pension fund. I sighed. We tried to keep that quiet until the investigation was complete, but nothing stayed secret in a company where some families had 2 or 3 generations working under the same roof. Tell them I'll address everything at tomorrow's all-hands meeting. No secrets, no spin. Just the truth. That evening, I returned to my condo in Back Bay, the one I'd bought after moving out of our marital home 3 months ago, another change David had been too self-absorbed to recognize as significant. He thought I was redesigning the estate and staying in the city to be closer to work. I'd barely closed the door when my phone rang, an unknown number. Hello. You think you're so clever. David's voice was tight with controlled rage. Turning my own board against me? Having me investigated? This isn't over, Sarah. Where are you, David? Why? Going to send more security to escort me out of somewhere. No, You just what? Wanted to check if I was drinking again? If I was going to embarrass you at another client dinner? His laugh was bitter. You've got your precious company. I hope it keeps you warm at night. The line went dead. I sat heavily on my sofa, the weight of everything suddenly pressing down. David and I had been married for 6 years. There had been good times, trips to the Caribbean, dinner parties with friends, lazy Sunday mornings reading the paper together. When had it all started to unravel? Maybe it was after my parents died, when he started seeing himself as the new patriarch rather than a steward of their legacy. Or maybe the signs had been there all along, and I'd been too in love to notice. My phone buzzed with a text from Jessica. Just got word, David's trying to freeze our business accounts. Treasury team already moved operating funds to the contingency accounts. He's going to be furious when he hits that wall too. I smiled despite myself. Jessica had thought of everything, the separate accounts, the backup data servers, the employee communication plan. She hadn't just been my parents' attorney, she'd been their friend. Have security stay overnight at the main plant, I texted back. I wouldn't put it past him to try something dramatic. The next morning, I addressed all 347 Harper Industries employees in our main assembly area. They gathered among the machines that produced the precision components our reputation was built on, machines my father had selected personally, that my mother had financed through careful growth rather than excessive debt. You've all heard rumors, I began, my voice carrying across the suddenly silent factory floor. About the attempted sale. About Mr. Harper's removal as CEO. About financial irregularities. I promised you the truth, so here it is. For the next 30 minutes, I laid out everything. The trust my parents had created, David's mismanagement, the pension fund investigation, my own plans for the company's future. Some of you have been with Harper Industries longer than I've been alive, I said, looking at the sea of faces. You helped my parents build something remarkable. Now I'm asking you to help me protect it and make it even stronger. An older machinist named Frank, who'd started working for my father when the company consisted of 2 machines in a rented garage, raised his hand. Your dad always said this company was built on trust, he said, his voice gruff with emotion. Seems to me you're honoring that. What do you need from us? I smiled, feeling a tightness in my throat. Your patience while we sort things out. Your ideas for how we can improve. And your trust, which I know has to be earned. The applause started slowly, then built until it echoed off the high ceilings. Watching these people, the heart of Harper Industries, I felt for the first time that we might actually pull this off. Back in my office, my assistant rushed in without knocking. Sarah, David's downstairs with 2 lawyers. Security stopped them at the entrance, but he's making a scene. The receptionist says there's a news van pulling up outside. Of course, David always did have a flair for the dramatic. Tell security to bring them to the main conference room. And call Jessica, have her meet us there. By the time I reached the conference room, David was pacing like a caged animal. His normally perfect appearance was disheveled, his hair uncombed, his shirt wrinkled, his eyes bloodshot. You've gone too far, he snarled as soon as I entered. Freezing my accounts, having me investigated, turning my friends on the board against me. Your accounts, David, your friends. That's always been the problem, hasn't it? You never understood that some things are bigger than your ego. One of his attorneys, a silver-haired man in a $1,000 suit, stepped forward. Mrs. Harper, my client has authorized me to inform you that he's filing for an emergency injunction to halt all operational changes at Harper Industries, pending a full investigation of the trust conversion. Jessica walked in, carrying a thick folder. And we welcome that investigation, Mr. Brennan. In fact, We've prepared a complete documentation package for the court. She turned to David, including the surveillance footage from the executive suite showing you removing files from the secured database after hours. David's face went white. You were spying on me? No, David, I replied. We were protecting the company. There's a difference. The second attorney, younger and clearly uncomfortable, cleared his throat. Mrs. Harper, regardless of the circumstances, my client is entitled to certain considerations as your spouse. The marital assets are subject to the prenuptial agreement that your client insisted upon, Jessica interrupted smoothly, which specifically excludes all inherited business interests. David slammed his fist on the conference table. This is my company. The room fell silent. In that moment, seeing the naked rage and entitlement on his face, I finally accepted what I'd been denying for too long. The man I married, the man I thought would be my partner in carrying on my parents' legacy, had never existed. No, David, I said quietly. It never was. As security escorted them from the building, I turned to Jessica. File the divorce papers. Today. She nodded, her expression sympathetic but approving. Already prepared. Just needed your final go-ahead. The next few weeks were a blur of activity. While David waged his legal battle, I concentrated on strengthening the company. Every morning, I arrived before sunrise, just like Dad used to do. Every evening, I was the last to leave, reviewing production reports, meeting with team leaders, learning everything I could about where we could improve. You don't have to do everything yourself, Mark said one night, finding me still at my desk at 9:30 p.m. That's what got David in trouble, thinking he had to be the one in control of everything. I looked up from the production reports I was reviewing. I'm not trying to control everything, Mark. I'm trying to understand everything. There's a difference. And there was. Unlike David, who saw the company as his personal achievement, I saw it as a living entity, thousands of moving parts that had to work together. Every decision affected real people with real families. Every innovation had to balance profitability with our core values. The preliminary hearing for David's injunction was scheduled for a Tuesday 3 weeks after the failed sale. I arrived at the courthouse early, dressed in a navy suit that had belonged to my mother. David showed up late, still accompanied by his 2 attorneys, but looking even more haggard than before. This is corporate theft, he declared as soon as the judge asked him to explain his position. My wife has stolen my position through legal manipulations and turned my own board against me. I sat quietly as his legal team presented their case, claiming the trust conversion was invalid, that my parents couldn't have intended to disinherit their son-in-law when they'd publicly named him as the successor. When it was our turn, Jessica stood. Your Honor, we'd like to present evidence of why the trust conversion was not only valid but necessary. For the next hour, we showed the judge everything. David's chronic absences from board meetings, his misuse of company funds, the trail of poor decisions that had nearly bankrupted us twice in the past year. But the most damaging evidence came from an unexpected source. We'd like to play a video, Jessica announced, recorded by Thomas and Eleanor Harper 4 months before their deaths. David's head snapped up as my parents appeared on the courtroom screen. They were sitting in Dad's wood-paneled study, looking serious but determined. If you're watching this, Dad began, it means David has tried to sell the company. We knew this day might come. I felt tears prick my eyes, hearing my father's voice again, the measured tones of an engineer who'd spent his life solving complex problems. Our son-in-law has many admirable qualities, he continued, but he has never understood that what we built isn't just a business. It's a community. Mom spoke next, her voice gentle but firm. Sarah, if you're seeing this, it means you've done what we hoped. Protected not just the company, but the people who make it work. The trust conversion wasn't about punishing David. It was about preserving our real legacy. By the time the video ended, David had slumped in his chair, all his bluster gone. The judge took only 20 minutes to make his decision. The trust conversion stands, he declared. Furthermore, Mr. Harper's claims of corporate theft are dismissed with prejudice. Outside the courthouse, David caught up to me as I was walking to my car. You've ruined everything, he said, his voice tight. I could have made us rich beyond imagination. I turned to face him, really looking at my husband for the first time in months. The man I'd fallen in love with, who now seemed like a stranger. We were already rich, David. Not just in money, but in purpose. You just never saw it. His jaw tightened. So that's it? I get nothing after 6 years of marriage. You get exactly what our prenup stipulates. And whatever the court decides is fair once the investigation into the pension fund is complete. I paused, suddenly tired of the conflict. The choice is yours. He stared at me for a long moment, then turned and walked away. For the first time since this all began, his shoulders weren't thrown back in defiance. He looked smaller somehow. Defeated. Back at the factory, the transformation was already underway. Employees walked with new purpose, offering suggestions, taking pride in their work. We landed 2 major new contracts in the first month alone. Your parents would be proud, Mark said, watching the activity on the production floor. Your mom especially. They'd be proud of all of us, I replied, thinking of the team that had stood by me through everything. As Phase 2 of Project Phoenix took shape, I began to feel something I hadn't experienced since before my parents' accident. Hope. 6 months after stopping the sale, I stood on the factory floor again, this time celebrating our most profitable quarter in Harper Industries history. The employee profit-sharing program, the cornerstone of Phase 2, had energized everyone, leading to innovations and efficiencies we'd never imagined. We've increased production by 22% while reducing waste by almost a third, Mark announced to the gathered employees, pointing to the digital dashboard we'd installed at the entrance to the main facility. That's not management doing that. That's all of you taking ownership. The applause was genuine, faces beaming with pride. In the back, I spotted Frank, the veteran machinist, wiping away a tear. He'd known my father since they were in engineering school together. Later, as the celebration wound down, Frank approached me. Your dad used to say that machines were just metal and circuits until people gave them purpose. He gestured at the bustling factory. He'd be damn proud of what you've done here, Sarah. Creating something bigger than just profits. I squeezed his shoulder, unable to speak for a moment. The transformation hadn't been easy. David's legal challenges had continued, each one more desperate than the last. The pension fund investigation had expanded, revealing a pattern of financial mismanagement that extended to several of David's executive appointees. 3 of them were now facing criminal charges. The divorce proceedings had turned ugly, with David contesting everything despite the clear language of our prenuptial agreement. His lawyers had tried to claim that my conspiracy to remove him as CEO constituted marital fraud. But through it all, Harper Industries had not only survived, it had thrived. My phone buzzed with a text from Jessica. Judge Barrett just denied David's latest appeal. The trust conversion ruling is final. Celebrate tonight. I smiled, feeling a weight lift from my shoulders. Maybe now we could focus entirely on the future instead of defending the past. Back in my office, which I'd restored to its original state, replacing David's cold modern furniture with my father's worn leather chair and the engineering diagrams he'd loved to display, I reviewed the plans for our newest project. Harper Industries was developing components for next-generation wind turbines that would increase efficiency by an estimated 18%. My assistant knocked on the open door. Sarah, there's someone here to see you. He doesn't have an appointment. Before I could respond, a familiar figure appeared in the doorway behind her. Andrew Miller, David's best friend and former college roommate. The same Andrew who'd served as best man at our wedding and who, until 6 months ago, had been our company's head of sales. It's all right, Kathy, I said, my guard immediately up. I'll give Mr. Miller 5 minutes. Andrew looked different from when I'd last seen him, at the board meeting where he'd sided with David and subsequently resigned rather than work under my leadership. His designer suit had been replaced with khakis and a button-down shirt. The cocky smile was gone. Hello, Sarah, he said, remaining standing even after I gestured to a chair. I'll be brief. I know I'm probably the last person you want to see right now. What can I do for you, Andrew? If this is about your stock options, you'll need to speak with Jessica. He shook his head. It's not about me. It's about David. My spine stiffened. If he sent you as some kind of... He didn't send me. He doesn't know I'm here. Andrew finally sat down, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees. Sarah, I'm worried about him. He's not doing well. I'm sorry to hear that, but... He's drinking. A lot. Lost his apartment because he couldn't make rent. He's been staying on my couch for the past 3 weeks. I blinked, trying to process this. David, who'd once insisted on custom Italian shoes and 50-year-old scotch, unable to pay rent? What about his family? His parents are wealthy, aren't they? Andrew's laugh was hollow. They cut him off after the news about the pension fund. Said they couldn't be associated with the scandal. His father's on some governor's commission, very image-conscious. Despite everything, I felt a twinge of sympathy. David had always craved his father's approval, measuring his success in the kind of external markers of wealth that would impress the stern former military officer. I'm sorry, Andrew, but I don't see what this has to do with me. The divorce will be final in a few months, and the financial terms have already been settled by the court. Andrew ran a hand through his hair, looking suddenly tired. I'm not asking for money. God knows, he doesn't deserve it after what he tried to do to this company. He paused. He hit rock bottom last night. Ended up in the ER with alcohol poisoning. When I got there, he was crying, Sarah, saying he destroyed everything good in his life. I sat back in my chair, unsure how to respond. The David I knew would never admit to making a mistake, let alone breaking down in tears. The doctors want him to get treatment, Andrew continued. There's a good facility in Vermont, but he's refusing. Says he doesn't deserve a second chance. He met my eyes directly. I thought maybe if you talked to him. Me? Andrew, I'm the last person David would listen to right now. You're wrong. Despite everything, he still respects you. More than anyone. I looked out the window at the factory floor below, watching my employees, our employees, going about their work with purpose and pride. Then I thought about David, brilliant but flawed, the man I had once loved enough to marry, now apparently self-destructing. I'll think about it, I finally said. That's all I can promise. After Andrew left, I canceled my remaining meetings and drove to the cemetery where my parents were buried. Their headstone was simple, their names, dates, and the words they built something that mattered. I sat on the small bench facing their grave, the late afternoon sun warming my face. I could use some advice, I said aloud. The company's doing well, better than ever, actually. But David, he's in trouble. I sighed. Part of me thinks it's karma. He nearly destroyed everything you built. Betrayed my trust. But another part of me remembers who he was before the power and money changed him. Wind rustled through the maple trees overhead. In the distance, a groundskeeper was mowing the perfectly maintained grass. Mom, you always said compassion isn't something we offer because others deserve it, but because it reflects who we are. I smiled, remembering her gentle wisdom. And Dad, you believed everyone deserves a chance to rebuild, to make something better from the ruins of their mistakes. I sat there until the sun began to set, thinking about second chances and redemption and the kind of person I wanted to be, not just as the leader of Harper Industries, but as a human being. The next morning, I called Andrew. Where is he? David was staying at Andrew's apartment in Cambridge, a place I'd visited many times during happier days. I asked our driver to drop me off a block away, needing the short walk to compose my thoughts. The apartment was on the 3rd floor of a converted brownstone. Andrew answered my knock immediately, relief evident on his face. Thank you for coming, he said, leading me inside. He's in the guest room. Been there since we got back from the hospital. The apartment was messier than I remembered, dishes in the sink, newspapers scattered on the coffee table, an empty pizza box on the counter. Andrew had always been the neatest of David's friends. The disorder spoke volumes about his current state of mind. I'll be in the living room if you need me, he said, gesturing toward a closed door down the hallway. I knocked softly. When no answer came, I opened the door slowly. The blinds were drawn, casting the room in shadows despite the bright spring day outside. David sat on the edge of the bed, his back to the door, shoulders hunched. He was wearing a wrinkled t-shirt and sweatpants, clothes the David I knew wouldn't have been caught dead in. Andrew, I told you I'm not hungry, he said without turning. It's not Andrew, I replied. David's spine straightened, but he didn't turn around. Sarah! His voice was rough, disbelieving. What are you doing here? Andrew came to see me. He's worried about you. David gave a bitter laugh. Good old Andrew. Always trying to fix things. He finally turned to face me, and I had to suppress a shock. His face was gaunt, with several days' growth of beard. Dark circles underscored bloodshot eyes. But it was the defeat in his expression that startled me most. David had always radiated confidence, even arrogance. "Well, now you've seen the mighty fallen," he said, gesturing at himself. "Enjoying the view? Must be satisfying after what I tried to do to your company." "Our company," I corrected automatically. "And no, I don't enjoy seeing you like this." He studied my face, looking for signs of deception. Finding none, he sighed. "Why are you here, Sarah? The divorce is almost final. You won. The company is yours. What more do you want?" I moved further into the room, taking a seat in the desk chair across from him. "Andrew says you're refusing treatment. Why waste the money? It's not like I have a life to go back to." He ran a hand through his unkempt hair. "No job, no wife, no future. My own parents won't even take my calls." "Since when does David Harper give up?" I asked. "The man I married fought for what he wanted, sometimes too hard." He looked away. Maybe that man was a facade, a fraud, just like everything else about me. We sat in silence for a moment, the faint sounds of traffic drifting up from the street below. "Why did you do it, David?" I finally asked. "Try to sell the company, I mean. Was it just about the money?" He seemed to consider the question seriously, perhaps for the first time. "At first, yes," he admitted. $52 million seemed like vindication, proof that I was as successful as my father always demanded. He gave a hollow laugh. "But it was more than that. I wanted to show everyone that I was in control. That Harper Industries was mine to do with as I pleased." "It was never yours," I said quietly. "Not really. It belonged to the people who built it. My parents, the employees, the community it supports. We were just stewards." David was silent for a long moment. "I understand that now," he finally said. "Too late, obviously." I studied him, trying to reconcile this broken man with the charming, ambitious person I'd fallen in love with. Had he always been this way beneath the surface, or had something changed him? "Andrew says there's a treatment center in Vermont," I said. "A good one." David shrugged. "Doesn't matter. I can't afford it, and insurance won't cover the full cost." "I'll cover it." His head snapped up, eyes narrowing. "Why would you do that? After everything?" "Because despite what you did to the company, what you did to us, I don't want to see you destroy yourself." I met his gaze steadily. "And because my parents raised me to believe that everyone deserves a chance to rebuild." Tears welled in his eyes, and he looked away quickly, embarrassed. "I don't deserve your help, Sarah." "It's not about deserving," I replied, echoing my mother's words. "It's about who I choose to be." 2 days later, I stood in the parking lot of the Lakeside Recovery Center, watching as Andrew helped David carry his suitcase toward the entrance. Before following Andrew inside, David turned back to me. "I know it doesn't mean much now," he said, "but I'm sorry. For everything." "I know," I replied. "Good luck, David." As I drove back to Boston, I felt lighter somehow. Not because I expected David's recovery to change anything between us. The divorce would proceed, and our paths had permanently diverged. But because I'd chosen compassion over resentment, building instead of destroying. Back at Harper Industries, Phase 3 of Project Phoenix was already underway. We'd broken ground on a new research and development facility focused on sustainable technologies. The employee education program was fully funded, providing tuition assistance for workers and their children. Most significantly, we'd established the Thomas and Eleanor Harper Foundation to support STEM education in underserved communities. The acquisition offer from Westbridge Technologies arrived, Jessica told me as I settled back into my office. $78 million, significantly more than Meridian was offering. I smiled. Draft the usual response. "Thank you for your interest in Harper Industries. We are not for sale at any price, but we welcome discussions about potential strategic partnerships," she recited from memory. "Perfect." After she left, I walked to the window overlooking the factory floor. The machines hummed with purpose, employees moved with confidence, and the digital dashboard showed all production targets, not just being met but exceeded. My father used to say that every machine on that floor had a story. Now I understood. We all have stories. The trick is making sure they're worth telling. Mine was still being written, but one chapter had definitively closed. And as I watched the company my parents had built transform into something even they might not have imagined, I was excited to see what the next chapter would bring. 1 year to the day after stopping the sale of Harper Industries, I stood at the podium in our newly expanded conference center, addressing employees, community leaders, and industry partners gathered for our annual Innovation Summit. Today marks not just the anniversary of a pivotal moment in our company's history, I said, looking out at the sea of faces, but the beginning of Harper Industries' next chapter. The digital screens behind me displayed our remarkable results. A 40% increase in revenue, expansion into 3 new sustainable technology markets, and most significantly, the launch of our employee ownership program that had made every full-time worker a stakeholder in our success. None of this would have been possible without each person in this room, I continued. You believed in this company when its future was uncertain. You contributed your ideas, your energy, and your commitment to something bigger than any individual. As I spoke, I caught glimpses of familiar faces in the audience. Frank, the veteran machinist, now heading our apprenticeship program. Mark and Diane from the management team, who'd stood by me from the beginning. Jessica, whose legal brilliance had protected my parents' legacy. Looking forward, I'm pleased to announce the establishment of the Eleanor Harper Innovation Grant, which will provide seed funding to women entrepreneurs in manufacturing and engineering. The applause was immediate and enthusiastic. My mother, who'd faced so many barriers in a male-dominated industry, would have been deeply moved. After the presentation, during the reception, Jessica pulled me aside. You haven't checked your phone, have you? I shook my head. I silenced it for the presentation. Why? The divorce was finalized this morning. The judge signed off on everything. I took a deep breath, feeling a complex mix of emotions. Relief, certainly, but also a quiet sadness for what might have been. Thank you for letting me know. There's something else, Jessica added, handing me an envelope. This arrived by courier for you earlier. It's from David. I excused myself and found a quiet corner to open the letter. Inside was a single sheet of paper with David's familiar handwriting. Sarah, today marks 1 year since you stopped me from making the biggest mistake of my life. It also marks 6 months of my sobriety, which wouldn't have been possible without your compassion when I least deserved it. I won't ask for forgiveness. Some bridges can't be rebuilt. But I wanted you to know that I finally understand what your parents were building and what you continue to build. Not just a company, but a legacy of purpose. The enclosed document legally transfers my remaining financial claims to the Thomas and Eleanor Harper Foundation. It's a small step toward making amends, though I know some debts can never truly be repaid. I've accepted a teaching position at a community college in Vermont. Turns out I'm good at explaining business concepts when I've let go of my ego. I hope in some small way this represents a better use of the education and opportunities I've been given. David, I refolded the letter carefully, tucking it back into the envelope. Maybe some people really could change, not enough to undo the past, but enough to create a different future. My phone buzzed with a text from Mark. Need you in the prototype lab when you have a minute. The team has something to show you. In the lab, a group of engineers gathered around our newest wind turbine component. Among them was Alicia, a brilliant young engineer who joined us through the scholarship program we'd established at my father's alma mater. We've increased efficiency by another 3%, she reported, her eyes bright with excitement. And we've simplified the design to reduce manufacturing costs. We think this could revolutionize accessible renewable energy for developing regions. I examined the prototype, recognizing elements of my father's original design philosophy: elegant simplicity, durability, purposeful innovation. But there were new elements too, improvements I knew he would have applauded. This is extraordinary work, I told the team. Let's fast-track the patent application. Later that evening, after most employees had gone home, I walked through the quiet factory. The machines were silent now, but they would hum with purpose again tomorrow, creating components that would help power homes, hospitals, and schools around the world. I stopped at the memorial wall we'd installed in the main lobby. It featured photographs of my parents at various stages of the company's growth, from that first rented garage to the global operation it had become. In the center was my favorite picture: Mom and Dad standing together on the factory floor, sleeves rolled up, pride evident in their faces as they explained some technical detail to a young employee. Beneath it was inscribed a quote from my father that had become our company's unofficial motto: "Success isn't measured by what you acquire, but by what you build that outlasts you." My phone buzzed with a message from Jessica. The board unanimously approved the 5-year expansion plan. Project Phoenix is officially complete. Time to celebrate. I smiled, thinking of all we'd accomplished and all that still lay ahead. Not complete, I texted back. Just entering a new phase. Outside, the sun was setting over Boston, painting the sky in shades of gold and purple. I thought about legacy, not just the physical assets of buildings and machines and bank accounts, but the intangible inheritance of values and purpose. My parents had built something remarkable from nothing. I had protected it when it was threatened. Now, together with hundreds of dedicated employee owners, we were transforming it into something even more meaningful. A company that measured success not just in profit margins, but in lives improved, communities strengthened, and futures brightened. In the end, that's what matters most. Not what we own, but what we build. Not what we take, but what we give. Not the wealth we accumulate, but the purpose we serve and the legacy we create. Sometimes it takes almost losing something precious to truly understand its worth. And sometimes it takes rebuilding after a storm to create something stronger than what stood before. My name is Sarah Harper, and this is not the end of my story. It's just the beginning of a new chapter, one written not alone, but together with every person who believes that success isn't inherited or taken. It's earned, it's built, and most importantly, it's shared.